What up, interwebs? This is your boy, the Acupuncture, laying some fresh new knowledge on the basic idea of acupuncture. Today we'll be discussing pulses. What are pulses? Well, pulses are a direct reflection of what's going on inside of the body.
Before we get down to the nitty-gritty of pulses, let's recap the 5 phases, or the Wuxing. The 5 phases consist of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Pulse diagnosis is an integral diagnostic tool in acupuncture. It requires lots of time, effort, and patience to get a good idea of what's going on. So, with lots of practice, you'll get a good sense of what is happening internally in the patient's body. But you can't learn it overnight. As a beginner in pulse diagnosis, it's best to start with feeling 3 different layers of the pulses, starting with the deep, middle, and superficial. The deep is associated with the yin organ, the middle is associated with the blood, and the most superficial is the yang bao. To start reading pulses, try to press down until you can't feel a pulse anymore, then slightly release. That is the yin organ. To find a yang bao, just slightly touch the skin, just feeling the pulse. That is the yang bao. And in between is the blood. This is a good beginning in pulse diagnosis. The fire phase pulses are the first pulses that we will identify. They are located on the patient's left wrist. Being on the left wrist of the patient, the physician must place his or her right index finger on the cubit of the patient's left wrist. To feel the heart yin organ pulse, press down until you can't feel the pulse anymore. Then slightly let up. That is the yin organ. Identifying the small intestine pulse, it is the most superficial yang bao pulse. So it is just on the surface of the skin where you can feel the pulse. That is the small intestine pulse. And in between is the blood pulse. That's the 3 fire pulses. To identify the wood phase, you must place your middle finger right next to your right index finger. To find the liver yin organ pulse, you must press until you can't feel the pulse anymore and then let loose. That is the most deep pulse, and that's the liver yin organ. To find a gallbladder pulse, you must let loose until you are barely touching the surface of the skin. That is the gallbladder pulse. And to find the liver blood or the wood blood pulse, it is the pulse that is found in between. And there you have the 3 wood pulses. The last pulse on the left wrist is the water pulses. To identify the water pulses, you must place your right ring finger right next to your right middle finger. To find the kidney yin organ pulse, you must push down until you can't feel the pulse anymore. Then slightly let up. That is the kidney yin organ pulse. To feel the bladder yang bao pulse, you must ever so slightly touch the surface of the skin until you can feel the pulse. That is the bladder yang bao pulse. And the middle pulses represents the water blood pulses. This concludes all the pulses on the patient's left wrist. Now we should move to the patient's right wrist to get a better understanding of pulse diagnosis. Starting with the patient's right wrist, we'll begin with looking at the metal pulses. To examine the patient's metal phase pulses, we will place our left index finger on the patient's right wrist. The deepest level is the yin organ, which is the lungs. The most superficial layer is the large intestine, which is the yang bao. And in between is the blood of the whole system of metal. The next pulses on the patient's right wrist are the earth pulses. Similar to the patient's wood pulses on the left wrist, the earth pulses are found on the patient's right wrist, utilizing the physician's left middle finger for identification. The deepest layer of the earth pulse is the yin organ, which is the spleen. The most superficial is the stomach, which is the yang bao. And the pulses in between are the earth's blood pulses. How I was taught was that the blood pulses of the earth phase are actually the pulses that determines all blood in the system. The last set of pulses on the patient's right wrist are the kidney yang pulses, also known as the ministerial fire pulses. To identify the kidney yang pulses, you must place your left ring finger on the patient's right wrist. The deepest layer is the shin bao, which is the heart envelope. The most superficial layer is the san jiao, which is the 3 metabolisms or the triple burner. Don't be surprised to find these pulses to be weak. Through our stresses of our everyday lives, it definitely takes a toll on the yin yang, or the Ministry of Fire. Pulses take a long time to figure out. However, in the beginning, it's good to feel the different characteristics of the pulses. If the pulses are fast, that means there's some trapped heat in the body. If the pulses are a little bit slow, that means there's some coldness or a deficiency in the body. Getting to learn pulse diagnosis can be a pretty hefty feat. However, with lots of practice and patience, you'll get a better understanding of what you're looking for. The more people's pulses you read, the more better you'll get at refining your touch. The most important rule of thumb about pulses is have fun with it. The more pulses you read, the better the experience you'll have in the beautiful world of pulses. I hope you enjoyed the segment on pulses. Until next time, this is the AccuPunk. Peace.